The steam wand on the espresso machine hissed like an angry snake. It was a loud, aggressive sound, but it wasn't loud enough to drown out the noise of Vivian's own heart hammering against her ribs. She gripped the stainless steel pitcher with a hand that trembled just slightly. She hated the trembling. It was a weakness. It was a tell. And in her new life, she couldn't afford to have any tells. "Oat milk latte for Brad," Vivian called out, forcing her voice to sound steady and cheerful. A man in a Patagonia vest and expensive running shoes walked up to the counter, grabbed the cup without making eye contact, and walked back to a table where 3 other men were discussing venture capital funding. Vivian let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She wiped her hands on her gray apron. This was her reality now. She was standing in the middle of the Slate, one of the most exclusive, high-end coffee shops in Pacific Heights, San Francisco. This wasn't just a cafe, it was a sanctuary for the ultra-wealthy. The people here didn't worry about rent or safety. They worried about stocks, IPOs, and which private school their kids would get into. It was the perfect place to hide. Vivian reached up and touched her hair. It was thick, dark, and curly, pulled back strictly into a tight, practical bun at the nape of her neck. She used to wear it down. She used to wear bright colors. She used to laugh loud enough to turn heads in a restaurant. But that was before Julian. Now Vivian was a ghost. She had deleted her Instagram, deactivated her Facebook, and smashed her old SIM card with a hammer before tossing it into a dumpster in Oakland. She had moved across the bay to San Francisco, renting a tiny, overpriced studio apartment in the Tenderloin district because it was all she could afford, just so she could work here in Pacific Heights. She chose this job for a specific reason. The manager paid in cash if you worked the early shift, and he didn't ask for too many documents as long as you showed up on time. She looked out the massive glass windows that lined the front of the shop. Pacific Heights was beautiful. It was one of the richest neighborhoods in the United States. The mansions across the street were worth $20 million each. The streets were clean. The police patrolled here constantly. But every time a black SUV slowed down outside the window, Vivian felt a cold spike of adrenaline shoot down her spine. Julian drove a black SUV. She turned back to the grinder, trying to focus on the smell of roasted beans rather than her paranoia. "He doesn't know you're here," she told herself. "He thinks you went to Los Angeles. You are safe." The bell above the front door chimed. It was a soft sound, welcoming and polite, but to Vivian, it sounded like an alarm. She instinctively kept her head down, focusing on wiping the counter, waiting to see who walked in. Usually, it was a nanny pushing a stroller that cost more than a car, or a tech CEO looking for caffeine. But the footsteps were different this time. They were heavy, rhythmic, and purposeful. Clack, 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 hard-soled dress shoes on the polished concrete floor. The chatter in the cafe seemed to dip. The volume of the room lowered. It was a subtle shift, like the air had suddenly been sucked out of the space. Vivian looked up. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine spread for billionaires. He was tall, Korean, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that were dark, calculating, and utterly terrifying. He wore a navy blue suit that was tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. It wasn't flashy, but the fabric screamed money. He didn't look like a customer. He didn't look like he was here for a vanilla latte. He looked like he owned the block. This was Minho. Vivian didn't know his name yet. She only knew that he was staring directly at her. He didn't move toward the line where the customers were waiting. He bypassed the velvet rope entirely. He walked straight toward the counter, his gaze locked on Vivian's face. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. He was just analyzing her. It felt like he was reading the serial number on her soul. Vivian's hands froze on the counter. Her instinct was to run. Every alarm bell in her head was ringing. Is this him? She thought. Did Julian send someone? Is this a hitman? The man stopped right in front of the register. He placed one hand on the counter. His fingers were long and elegant. On his wrist sat a silver watch that caught the morning light, understated, but clearly worth a fortune. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, his eyes scanning her face, her neck, her hands. Vivian tried to speak. Can I help you, sir?" Her voice cracked. She hated herself for it. The man didn't answer immediately. He leaned in closer. The smell of expensive cologne, sandalwood, and cold ocean air drifted over the counter. The tension was thick enough to choke on. The other customers were watching now. They knew who he was. Vivian could see the deference in their eyes. They were terrified of him, too. Now, before we continue with what happened next, I need you to do something real quick. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button right now. Also, drop a comment about your favorite part of the story and tell me what city you're watching from. I love seeing where all my viewers are tuning in from. And if you're watching without subscribing, I see you. Don't be shy. We're family here. Subscribe now and let's keep going. The man, Minho, didn't order a coffee. He didn't ask for a menu. Instead, he walked around the side of the counter. Vivian gasped and took a step back, her back hitting the espresso machine. "Sir, you can't come back here. This is for employees only." Minho didn't stop. He walked right into her personal space. The counter was narrow, and suddenly he was everywhere. He towered over her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His skin was flawless, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, but his eyes were cold. He stopped inches from her. He looked down at her hands, which were now gripping her apron so hard her knuckles were turning yellow. "You're trembling," Minho said. His voice was deep, smooth, and shockingly calm. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Vivian swallowed hard. "I had too much caffeine, I'm fine." Minho tilted his head slightly. He reached out. Vivian flinched, closing her eyes, expecting a blow, expecting violence, because that's what she was used to. But nothing hit her. She opened her eyes. Minho had reached past her to adjust the temperature dial on the grinder, but he wasn't looking at the machine. He was looking at her reaction. He had tested her. He wanted to see if she would flinch. "People who drink too much caffeine don't flinch like they are about to be struck," Minho said softly. He lowered his hand. "You are terrified. Who are you afraid of?" Vivian's heart stopped. She couldn't breathe. "He knows," she thought. "He can see right through me." "I don't know what you're talking about," Vivian lied. She tried to sound defiant, tried to channel some of the old Vivian, the one who didn't take nonsense from anyone. "I need to get back to work. If you aren't going to order, you need to leave. My boss won't like you being back here." A small, dry chuckle escaped Minho's lips. It was a terrifying sound because it held zero humor. He turned slowly and looked out at the café. He looked at the managers, the other baristas, the customers. He raised one hand in a lazy gesture. Immediately, the floor manager, a guy named Rick who usually yelled at everyone, came rushing over. Rick looked sweaty and nervous. "Mr. Kim," Rick stammered, bowing his head slightly. "I didn't know you were coming in today. Is everything okay? Is the coffee to your liking?" Minho didn't look at Rick. He kept his eyes on Vivian. "Rick, this new barista, who hired her?" "I did, sir," Rick said quickly. "She started 3 days ago. Is there a problem? I can fire her right now if—" "No," Minho interrupted. "She stays." He turned back to Vivian. The realization hit her like a bucket of ice water. Mr. Kim, Minho Kim. He wasn't a customer. He wasn't a hitman. He owned the building. He owned the cafe. He was her boss's boss. "I own the coffee you are pouring," Minho said, his voice dropping to a whisper so only she could hear. "I own the tiles you are standing on, so don't tell me what my boss will think." Vivian felt the blood drain from her face. She had just tried to kick the owner out of his own shop. I didn't know. I'm sorry, sir." Minho studied her for another long moment. He wasn't angry about the disrespect. He seemed fascinated by her fear. He was a predator who had found a wounded bird in his territory. And he was trying to figure out if it was worth eating or nursing back to health. "What is your name?" he asked. "Vivian," she whispered. "Vivian," he repeated, testing the word. The way he said her name made it sound foreign and intimate at the same time. "Fix your apron, Vivian, it's crooked, and stop shaking. It makes the customers nervous." He stepped back, creating space between them. The air rushed back into Vivian's lungs. "Bring a black Americano to my office in 10 minutes, Minho commanded. "And don't spill it." He turned on his heel and walked toward the back of the cafe, where a heavy steel door led to the private offices upstairs. The entire cafe seemed to exhale as he left the room. Vivian leaned against the counter, her legs feeling like jelly. She looked at Rick. "Who is that?" she hissed. Rick wiped sweat from his forehead. "That's Min-ho Kim. He owns the Golden Gate Syndicate. He owns half the real estate in this city." Rick leaned in closer, his voice dropping. "Listen to me, Vivian. Do exactly what he says. You do not want to get on his bad side. The rumors about him, let's just say he's not just a businessman." Vivian's stomach twisted. She had run away from a controlling, dangerous man, only to land a job working for a man who rumors said was a mafia boss. She looked at the espresso machine. She had 10 minutes to make the perfect Americano. If she messed this up, she lost the job. If she lost the job, she couldn't pay rent. If she couldn't pay rent, she had to move. If she moved, Julian might find her. She grit her teeth. She wasn't going to run again. Not today. 10 minutes later, Vivian stood in front of the steel door. She held a ceramic cup on a saucer. Her hands were steadier now. She had forced herself to breathe, to compartmentalize the fear. She was good at that. She had learned it the hard way. She knocked twice. "Enter," Min-ho's voice came from inside. Vivian pushed the door open. The office was nothing like the café downstairs. It was sleek, modern, and dark. The walls were lined with books and abstract art. One wall was entirely glass, overlooking the San Francisco Bay. You could see the Golden Gate Bridge in the distance, shrouded in fog. Min-ho was sitting behind a massive desk made of black wood. He was typing on a laptop. He didn't look up when she entered. "Place it on the coaster," he said. Vivian walked across the room. The carpet was so thick her shoes made no sound. She placed the coffee down gently on the designated coaster. Not a drop spilled. "Thank you, sir," she said, turning to leave. "Sit," Min-ho said. Vivian paused. "Sir, I have to get back to the floor. It's the morning rush." Min-ho stopped typing. He slowly closed the laptop. He looked up at her. "I told Rick you are taking a break. Sit down, Vivian." There was no room for argument in his tone. Vivian pulled out the leather chair opposite his desk and sat down. She sat on the edge of the seat, her back straight, her hands clasped in her lap. Min-ho picked up the coffee and took a sip. He didn't break eye contact. He put the cup down. "You lied to me downstairs," he said calmly. "I didn't." "You said you were cold. You said it was caffeine." Min-ho leaned back in his chair, crossing his fingers. "I deal with liars every day, Vivian, professional liars, people who lie for millions of dollars. You are not a professional liar. You are terrible at it." Vivian bit her lip. She felt exposed. "Why are you working here?" Min-ho asked. "You are overqualified." "How do you know that?" "I watched you work for 3 minutes. You anticipate orders before people say them. You manage the workflow better than Rick does. You articulate your words like someone who is educated. Yet, here you are, working for minimum wage plus tips in a cafe where the rent is higher than most people's annual salary." He picked up a file folder from his desk and tossed it toward her. It slid across the smooth wood and stopped right in front of her hands. Vivian stared at it. "What is this?" "I had my assistant, June, run a background check on you while you were making my coffee," Min-ho said. Vivian's heart hammered. The fake name, the fake social security number, he knows. "Open it," he ordered. Vivian opened the folder with shaking fingers. She expected to see her real life exposed. She expected to see Julian's name. But the folder was empty. She looked up, confused. Min-ho's eyes narrowed. "Exactly. It's empty, Vivian, nothing. No credit history, no rental history prior to last month, no social media footprint. You didn't exist until 30 days ago." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "In my world, when someone doesn't exist, it means one of two things. They are either a spy or they are running for their life." He waited. The silence in the room was heavy. "I'm not a spy," Vivian whispered. "Then you are running," Min-ho said. "Who is chasing you?" Vivian looked at the door. She wanted to bolt, but she knew she couldn't outrun him. And oddly, despite his intimidating aura, he wasn't threatening her. He was curious. "It's personal," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. "And it doesn't affect my ability to make coffee." "It does if your pursuer walks through my front door and starts shooting," Min-ho countered sharply. "My business is my sanctuary. I need to know if you are bringing a storm to my doorstep." Vivian looked him in the eye. "He won't find me here. I was careful." "You think you were careful," Minho corrected. "But you are shaking because I walked in wearing a suit. That tells me the man you are running from is wealthy, powerful, someone who wears suits." He was too smart. It was terrifying. "If I tell you," Vivian said quietly, "will you fire me?" Minho looked at her. He saw the desperation in her eyes. He saw the bruise on her spirit, even if there were no bruises on her skin. He was a man who understood power dynamics better than anyone. He hated bullies. He was a boss, yes, and he was ruthless, but he had a code. "That depends," Minho said. "If you tell me the truth, I might let you stay. If you lie to me again, you are gone before you can finish that sentence." Vivian took a deep breath. She had to gamble. She had to trust this dangerous stranger. "His name is Julian," she said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. He's in tech. He's an investor. He didn't like it when I tried to leave." "Didn't like it?" Minho raised an eyebrow. "He told me that if I ever left him, he would make sure I never worked in this state again. He said he would ruin me. He gets violent when he doesn't get his way." Minho's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. A shadow passed over his face. He tapped his finger against the desk. "Julian," Minho said. "Julian Vance." Vivian's eyes went wide. "How do you know his last name?" Minho didn't answer. A small, cold smile touched his lips. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who just realized dinner was serving itself. "Julian Vance comes to this café," Minho said. "He sits at table 4. He drinks oat milk cappuccinos. And he owes my associates a significant amount of money from a poker game in Macau 3 years ago." Vivian felt the room spin. He comes here." "Rarely," Minho said, "but he is in the city." Vivian stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I have to go. I can't work here, if he comes here." "Sit down," Minho barked. It was a command, sharp and absolute. Vivian froze. "If you run, he will find you," Minho said, his voice lowering to a calm, reasonable tone. "He has resources. You have an apron and a fake ID. You will lose." "So what do I do?" Vivian asked, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. "I can't stay here waiting for him to walk in." Minho stood up. He walked around the desk. He moved with a grace that was almost unnatural. He stopped in front of her, leaning against the edge of the desk, crossing his arms over his chest. "You stay," Minho said. "You work, you make my coffee, you keep your head down." "But—" "And," Minho interrupted, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak, "you let me handle Julian Vance." "Why?" Vivian asked. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Minho looked at her. He looked at the curly bun that was starting to come loose. He looked at the defiance hidden under her fear. "Because," Minho said softly, "I don't like it when people touch things that belong to me." "I don't belong to you," Vivian said, a spark of anger flaring up. Minho smirked. "You work in my shop. You wear my apron. For the 8 hours you are on that clock, you are under my protection, and nobody threatens my employees, not even Julian Vance." He pushed a button on his desk phone. "June, come in here." The door opened instantly. A younger Korean man in a sharp gray suit walked in. He held a tablet. "Yes, boss," June asked. "Update the security protocols for the café," Minho said, never taking his eyes off Vivian. "I want a guard posted at the rear exit, and flag Julian Vance's license plate in the perimeter system. If he gets within 2 blocks of this building, I want to know." "Understood," June said. He glanced at Vivian, surprised, but asked no questions. He turned and left. Minho looked back at Vivian. "Go back to work, Vivian. You're safe now." Vivian stared at him. She didn't know if she was safe or if she had just traded one devil for another. But looking at Minho, standing there in his navy suit like a king in his castle, she realized one thing. Julian Vance was scary, but Minho Kim was terrifying. And for the first time in months, she felt a tiny glimmer of hope. Because maybe, just maybe, it took a monster to scare away a monster. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Minho said, turning back to the window to look at the city he ruled. Just make sure tomorrow's coffee is hotter. The lunch rush in Pacific Heights was a different kind of beast. In other parts of the city, lunch meant people grabbing a sandwich and rushing back to cubicles. At the Slate, lunch was a social performance. The café filled with women in athleisure, where that cost thousands of dollars, discussing charity auctions, and young tech founders in hoodies pitching startups over matcha lattes. Vivian was drowning in orders. I need 2 oat milk cortados, dry. A woman in oversized sunglasses barked, not looking up from her phone. Coming right up, Vivian said, her hands moving automatically. She was in the zone. Grind, tamp, pull, steam, pour. It was a rhythm that usually calmed her, but today her nerves were frayed wires. Min-ho had been in the cafe for 3 hours. He hadn't left. He sat at a corner table, table 3, which offered a panoramic view of the entire floor and the street outside. He had a laptop open, and occasionally men in suits would come in, whisper something to him, leave a folder, and walk out. He looked like a king holding court. Every time Vivian looked up, she felt his eyes on her. He wasn't staring lecherously. He was watching her like a bodyguard watching a client. It was unnerving, yet strangely grounding. The fog that had blanketed San Francisco all morning began to lift, revealing the stark, bright California sun. It glared off the windshields of the cars passing by on the street. Vivian turned to the espresso machine to flush the group head. The noise of the cafe was a dull roar. Then she saw it. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, a vehicle slowed down. It was a black Range Rover, tinted windows, custom rims. It looked exactly like Julian's car. It crept along the curb, crawling at a pace that suggested the driver was looking for someone. Vivian's heart stopped beating. The blood in her veins turned to ice. He found me. The thought was a scream in her mind. The cafe, the customers, the smell of coffee, it all vanished. All she could see was that black metal beast prowling outside the glass. She was holding a heavy ceramic mug in her left hand. Her fingers went numb. Crash. The sound was explosive. The mug hit the concrete floor and shattered into a dozen jagged white pieces. Hot water splashed onto Vivian's ankles, but she didn't feel the burn. She was paralyzed, her eyes locked on the car outside. The cafe went silent. The chatter stopped. The clinking of spoons stopped. Every head turned toward the counter. Rick, the manager, threw his hands up. Vivian, for God's sake, that's imported ceramic. What is wrong with you today? Vivian couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. She needed to hide. She needed to duck behind the counter before the driver looked in. But her legs wouldn't move. She was a deer in headlights, waiting for the impact. The car stopped. The windows started to roll down. Vivian started to hyperventilate. This is it. This is the end. Suddenly, the view was blocked. A wall of dark blue fabric filled her vision. Min-ho was there. He had moved so fast that no one had seen him leave his table. He stood directly between Vivian and the window, his broad shoulders completely obscuring her from the street. He didn't look at the mess on the floor. He didn't look at the customers. He stood with his back to the window, facing her. Look at me, Min-ho commanded. His voice was low, cutting through the panic in her brain like a knife. Vivian looked up at him. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were intense. Breathe, he said. It's him, Vivian choked out, her voice barely a whisper. The car, it's him. Min-ho didn't turn around. He didn't even flinch. He reached out and placed a hand on the counter, leaning in to create a barrier of privacy around her. Don't look at the street, Min-ho said firmly. Look at my tie, focus on the knot, tell me what color it is. It's blue, Vivian stammered. What shade? Navy, with silver threads. Good, Min-ho said. Keep looking at it. Behind Min-ho, through the edges of his silhouette, the car window finished rolling down. A woman with blonde hair leaned out to check her makeup in the side mirror. Then the car accelerated and drove away. It wasn't Julian. Min-ho, who had been watching the reflection in the espresso machine behind Vivian, relaxed his shoulders by a fraction of an inch. It's gone, he said. It wasn't him. Vivian let out a shuddering breath, her knees buckling. She grabbed the edge of the counter to hold herself up. The adrenaline crash hit her hard. Rick came storming over, a dustpan in his hand. "Mr. Kim, I am so sorry about this. She's clumsy. I'll dock it from her pay." Minho held up a hand, silencing Rick instantly. "Clean up the ceramic, Rick," Minho said coldly, "and do not speak to her." He looked back at Vivian. "Go to the back, wash your face. You look like you've seen a ghost." "I can't leave the floor," Vivian whispered, conscious of the customers staring. "It's the rush." "The rush can wait," Minho said. He reached out, and for a second his fingers brushed against her arm. His touch was warm, a stark contrast to the cold fear inside her. "Go." Vivian nodded and fled to the back room, her hands still shaking. Minho turned to the café. The customers were watching, whispering. He adjusted his suit jacket and swept his gaze across the room. It was a look of pure authority. "Enjoy your coffee," he said to the room. It wasn't a wish, it was an order. The customers immediately went back to their conversations, pretending nothing had happened. No one wanted to hold Minho Kim's gaze for too long. 30 minutes later, the lunch rush had died down. Vivian was in the break room, sitting on a crate of almond milk, staring at her hands. She felt stupid. She had caused a scene over a random soccer mom in a Range Rover. The door opened. Vivian jumped. It was Minho. He closed the door behind him and locked it. The break room was small, smelling of bleach and roasted beans. Minho looked out of place here, like a panther in a petting zoo. "You handled that poorly," Minho said. He didn't say it meanly. He said it like a teacher correcting a student. "I know," Vivian said, staring at her shoes. "I'm sorry, you should probably fire me. I'm a liability." "I don't fire people for being afraid," Minho said. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "But I do fire people for being unprepared. That was a specific type of fear, Vivian. You didn't just think he was coming to yell at you. You thought he was coming to take you." Vivian looked up. "You don't know Julian. He doesn't just yell. He owns people. He thinks I'm his property." "Tell me," Minho said. "I need the details. If I am going to be your shield, I need to know the caliber of the bullet." Vivian took a deep breath. She had never told anyone the full story. Not even the police, because the police in Julian's district played golf with his father. "We met 2 years ago," Vivian began. "He was charming. He swept me off my feet. But then the walls started closing in. He made me quit my graphic design job. He said he wanted to take care of me. Then he cut off my friends. He put a tracker on my car. He monitored my phone." Minho's expression remained stony, but his jaw tightened. He detested men who needed to control women to feel powerful. To Minho, that wasn't strength, it was weakness. "I tried to leave 3 months ago," Vivian continued, her voice gaining strength. "He found me at a hotel. He dragged me back to the house. He told me that if I ever tried to run again, he would hurt my sister in Chicago. He would ruin my parents' credit. He has files on everyone I love." "Blackmail," Minho murmured. "Classic narcissist." "He's not just a narcissist," Vivian said. "He's connected, he has money. He thinks he's untouchable." Minho pushed off the doorframe and walked toward her. The small room felt charged with electricity. "In this city," Minho said quietly, "there are different levels of untouchable. Julian Vance thinks he is a shark because he swims in a pond. He has no idea that he has just swum into the ocean." He stopped in front of her. "Does he know you are in San Francisco?" "I don't think so," Vivian said. "I used cash for the bus ticket. I haven't used my credit cards." "Good, that gives us time." "Time for what?" Vivian asked. "Time to restructure your reality," Minho said. He reached into his inner suit pocket and pulled out a sleek black phone. It wasn't a smartphone, it was an encrypted burner. He held it out to her. "Take this," he ordered. Vivian hesitated. "What is it?" "It's a secure line. It has one number programmed in it. Mine. If you see that car again, if you get a strange feeling, if the wind blows in a way you don't like, you call me. You don't drop cups, you call." Vivian took the phone. It was heavy and cold. "Minho, why are you doing this? I'm just a barista." Minho looked down at her. He studied the way her curly hair framed her face, the way her eyes held a mixture of terror and resilience. He saw something in her that he recognized, a survivor. "You are an investment," Minho lied. He told himself it was a lie. He told himself he was just protecting his business assets. But deep down, he knew it was more. He was intrigued by her. "And I protect my investments." He turned to the door. "Go back to work, Vivian, and fix your bun. It's messy again." Vivian watched him leave. She held the black phone to her chest. For the first time in her life, a man was giving her a tool to protect herself, rather than taking her tools away. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Minho didn't go back to his table. He walked straight to the back exit, stepping out into the alleyway where his personal security detail was waiting. June was there, leaning against a black sedan, smoking a cigarette. He straightened up when Minho exited. "Boss?" June asked, dropping the cigarette and stepping on it. Minho's face was a mask of cold fury. The calm demeanor he had shown Vivian was gone. In its place was the face of the shadow of soul, the man who ran the Golden Gate Syndicate. "Julian Vance," Minho said, the name sounding like a curse. "I want to know everything. I want to know where he sleeps, who he banks with, and which mistress he is currently seeing." "He's a mid-level player, boss," June said, confused. "Why the interest?" "He threatened one of ours," Minho said. He didn't specify that one of ours was a girl he had met 3 days ago. "Understood," June said, pulling out his tablet. "I'll have a dossier by tonight." "And June," Minho added, looking up at the security camera mounted above the back door. "The girl, Vivian, she doesn't leave this building alone. When her shift ends, you drive her home. If she protests, tell her it's company policy for late shifts." "It's a 2 p.m. shift, boss. It's not late," June pointed out. Minho shot him a look that could freeze water. "It is late if I say it is late," Minho said. "Yes, sir," June said quickly. Minho checked his watch. He had a meeting with the Triad heads in Chinatown in 20 minutes, but all he could think about was the fear in Vivian's eyes. He hated it, and he decided, right there in the alleyway, that he was going to be the one to extinguish it. Julian Vance was going to learn a very painful lesson about territory. Minho took out his own phone and sent a text to his head of cybersecurity. "Access the traffic grid for Pacific Heights. I want an alert on any vehicle registered to Julian Vance or his known associates. Secure the perimeter. No one touches the girl." He pocketed the phone and walked toward his car. The game had started. Vivian thought she was hiding, but Minho was done hiding her. He was preparing to hunt. 3 days passed. In the high-stakes world of San Francisco, 3 days was a lifetime. Stocks could crash, companies could be bought, and fortunes could be lost in 72 hours. But for Vivian, the last 3 days had been the longest and, strangely, the calmest of her life. The café, the Slate, had become her fortress. She fell into a rhythm. The early morning fog would roll down the hills of Pacific Heights, dampening the sound of the city. She would arrive at 5:30 a.m. Minho's security team, she now recognized them, 2 stoic men in black suits who stood across the street pretending to read newspapers, would nod at her as she unlocked the door. Minho was always there by 8:00 a.m. He had never been a regular presence in the cafe before she started, according to Rick. But now, he was a fixture. He claimed he was auditing the workflow, but everyone knew that was a lie. He sat at table 3, the one with the best vantage point of the entrance and the counter. He worked on his laptop, took meetings with dangerous-looking men who spoke in hushed tones, and drank the Americanos Vivian made him. He watched her. It wasn't a predatory gaze, it was a tether. Whenever a customer raised their voice or a loud car backfired outside, Vivian's eyes would snap to Minho. And every single time he was already looking at her, offering a subtle nod or a calm look that said, "I am here. You are safe." Vivian started to breathe again. She started to let her guard down. She even wore her curly hair a little looser, a few tendrils escaping the strict bun she had mandated for herself. It was Wednesday afternoon. The cafe was quiet, the lull between the lunch rush and the afternoon caffeine fix. The air smelled of roasted Ethiopian beans and rain. "Vivian," Minho called from his table. Vivian wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. She didn't tremble anymore when she approached him. "Yes, sir." Another Americano. Minho looked up from a stack of documents. He looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes, hinting at the fact that he ran a criminal empire by night while protecting a barista by day. "No," he said. "Sit for a moment. Rick can handle the register." Vivian glanced at Rick, who was busy reorganizing the pastry case and avoiding eye contact with Min-ho at all costs. She sat down opposite him. "You look different today," Min-ho observed. "I slept," Vivian admitted, a small smile touching her lips. "For the first time in months, I actually slept through the night." "Good," Min-ho said. He leaned back, the leather chair creaking. "Sleep is essential. Fear burns calories you need to replenish." "Min-ho," Vivian started, using his name. It felt bold, but he didn't correct her. "Why are you doing all this? The security outside, the drive home with June, I'm just nobody." Min-ho's eyes locked onto hers. They were dark, endless pools of intelligence. "You aren't nobody, Vivian. You are someone who had the courage to leave a cage. I respect that. Most people stay in the cage because they are afraid of the wild. You chose the wild." Vivian felt a flush rise in her cheeks. It wasn't just gratitude she was feeling. It was attraction. A dangerous, ill-advised attraction to a man who was clearly more dangerous than the one she had left. Just then, the cafe landline rang. It sat on the counter behind the bar. Usually, it was vendors calling about milk deliveries or customers asking about Wi-Fi. "I should get that," Vivian said, standing up. "Let Rick get it," Min-ho said dismissively. "Rick is in the back grabbing croissants. It'll stop ringing in a second." Vivian walked back to the counter. She picked up the receiver. "The Slate, Pacific Heights. How can I help you?" she said, her voice bright and professional. There was silence on the other end. Vivian frowned. "Hello, is anyone there?" For a moment, all she heard was heavy breathing. Then, a voice that made her blood turn into slush cut through the line. "Did you think a coffee shop in Pacific Heights could hide you, Vive?" The world tilted. Vivian gripped the edge of the counter so hard her fingernails dug into the wood. The voice was smooth, arrogant, and terrifyingly familiar. "Julian," she whispered. She couldn't help it. The name slipped out like a curse. "I have to give it to you, babe," Julian said, his tone conversational, like he was asking about the weather. "You got creative. A barista. Really, with your degree. It's kind of pathetic, honestly. But don't worry. I'm coming to rescue you from that apron." "How?" Vivian's voice failed her. "How did you find me?" "I have money, Vivian. Money buys eyes. A private investigator found a receipt, one slip-up. That's all it takes." Julian laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "I'm in the city. I'm close. Actually, I'm about 3 minutes away. Make sure my cappuccino is ready. Dry foam, you know how I like it." Click, the line went dead. Vivian stood frozen. The receiver still pressed to her ear. The dial tone buzzed, mocking her. 3 minutes. Panic, raw and primal, exploded in her chest. She dropped the phone. It clattered onto the counter, knocking over a jar of sugar packets. She spun around. Her eyes found Min-ho. He was already standing. He had seen the way her shoulders collapsed. He had seen the color drain from her skin. He was moving toward her before she even took a step. Vivian didn't walk. She ran. She scrambled out from behind the counter, ignoring the confused looks of 2 customers who had just walked in. "He's coming," she gasped as she reached Min-ho. She grabbed the lapels of his expensive suit, bunching the fabric in her fists. She was hysterical. "He's coming right now. 3 minutes. I have to go. I have to run." Min-ho caught her wrists. His grip was iron. "Vivian, stop." "No, you don't understand. He's here." Vivian tried to pull away, her eyes darting to the door. "I need to get to the back exit. I need to leave the city." Min-ho pulled her closer, forcing her to look at him. He didn't shake her, but he held her steady, acting as an anchor in her storm. "You are not running," Min-ho said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice of a general before a battle. "You are done running." "He has a gun, he has guys," Vivian cried, tears spilling over. "He'll hurt you. He'll burn this place down." Min-ho's expression darkened. A vein pulsed in his jaw. The idea that some tech bro playboy could burn down his establishment was insulting. "Let him come," Min-ho said softly. "What?" Vivian stared at him. "You are on my territory," Min-ho said. He released her wrists and buttoned his jacket. He adjusted his cuffs. He looked immaculate. He looked lethal. Go stand behind the counter. Minho, please. Go stand behind the counter, he repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. Make a cappuccino, dry foam. Vivian's jaw dropped. How did you know? I heard you on the phone. I read lips, Minho lied. He didn't read lips. He had just guessed the type of man Julian was. Do it. Show him you are working. Show him you are not afraid. Vivian shook her head, trembling. I am afraid. Minho stepped close to her, lowering his voice to a whisper against her ear. Then borrow my courage, because I have enough for both of us. Now go. Vivian swallowed a sob. She looked at the door, then back at Minho. She trusted him. Against all logic, she trusted him. She turned and walked back behind the counter. Her hands were shaking so bad she could barely hold the milk pitcher. She started the machine. The grinder whirred. Minho didn't go back to his table. He walked to the center of the room. He stood there, relaxed, one hand in his pocket, waiting. 2 minutes later, the bell above the door chimed. It wasn't a polite chime this time. The door was thrown open with force. The wind from the street rushed in, carrying the sound of traffic and the smell of exhaust. The atmosphere in the cafe shifted instantly. It was as if the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Julian Vance walked in. He looked exactly as Vivian remembered, which made it worse. He was handsome in a generic, polished way. He wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost $2,000, dark jeans, and designer loafers. He had the confident, swaggering walk of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. He didn't look at the menu. He didn't look at the other customers. His eyes scanned the room and locked onto Vivian instantly. A smirk curled his lips. It was a possessive, triumphant smirk. There she is, Julian said loud enough for the room to hear. The runaway bride. Vivian froze. She was holding the cappuccino pitcher. She felt sick. The trauma of the last 2 years came rushing back, the gaslighting, the threats, the feeling of being small. Julian strode across the cafe floor. He ignored the velvet rope. He ignored Rick, who tried to step forward and then retreated when he saw the look in Julian's eyes. Julian marched right up to the counter. He leaned over, placing both hands on the surface, invading her space. Playtime is over, Vive, Julian said, his voice dropping to a menacing purr. Get your bag, the car is outside. Vivian's voice was stuck in her throat. I'm working. Leave me alone, Julian. Working, Julian laughed. He reached out and flicked her name tag. You're serving coffee to hipsters. It's embarrassing. I'm doing you a favor. Now come on, don't make me drag you. He reached over the counter. His hand shot out and grabbed Vivian's forearm. His grip was painful, digging into her skin. No, Vivian cried out, trying to yank her arm back. Stop making a scene, Julian hissed, his nice guy mask slipping. You're coming with me right now. He pulled. Vivian stumbled forward, knocking over a stack of cups. Suddenly, a shadow fell over them. A hand, large, strong, and impeccably manicured, clamped down on Julian's shoulder. It wasn't a friendly tap. It was a vice grip. It was the kind of grip that crushed muscle against bone. Julian gasped, his eyes flying wide. He tried to shrug it off, but the hand didn't move. It was like being grabbed by a statue. Let go of her, a deep voice said. Julian turned his head, wincing in pain. He looked up. Minho was standing there. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't posturing. He was simply existing in a state of controlled violence. His face was a mask of indifference, but his eyes were burning with a cold, blue fire. Who do you think you are? Julian spat, trying to sound tough but failing as the pressure on his shoulder increased. This is a domestic dispute, pal. Mind your own business. This is my business, Minho said calmly. You are in my shop. You are shouting at my employee, and you are damaging my merchandise. He squeezed harder. Julian's knees buckled slightly. Let go of me, Julian yelled, releasing Vivian's arm to try and pry Minho's fingers off his shoulder. Do you know who I am? I can buy this dump and turn it into a parking lot by tomorrow morning. Minho didn't blink. He finally released Julian, but he did it with a shove that sent Julian stumbling back 2 steps. Julian straightened his sweater, his face red with humiliation and rage. He glared at Minho. Then, recognition dawned on his face. He narrowed his eyes. He looked at Minho, suit. He looked at the watch. He looked at the face he had seen in the business section of the newspaper and in whispers at underground poker games. The color drained from Julian's face, faster than it had drained from Vivian's. Minho, Kim, Julian stammered. Minho smiled. It was a terrifying smile. It didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Vance, I was wondering when you would show up. You're late. I didn't know, Julian stuttered, stepping back. The arrogance evaporated. I didn't know she worked for you. She does, Minho said, taking a step forward. Julian took a step back. And in my organization, we have very strict rules about harassment. Julian looked around. He realized suddenly that the two men reading newspapers by the door had stood up. They were blocking the exit. He looked at the kitchen door. Rick was standing there with a phone in his hand. Julian was trapped. Look, Mr. Kim, Julian said, his voice trembling. This is a misunderstanding. Vivian and we have a history. She's confused. I'm just trying to take her home. She is home, Minho said. He moved to stand next to the counter, placing himself physically between Julian and Vivian. He leaned casually against the granite, looking Julian up and down with disdain. You look successful, Julian, Minho noted dryly. Nice sweater, expensive shoes. It's a shame about your gambling debts. Julian froze. What? The syndicate holds your paper, Minho said softly, so only Julian and Vivian could hear. 200,000 from the game in Macau. Another 50 from the private room in Vegas. You've been dodging the collectors for 6 months. Minho checked his nails, looking bored. I bought your debt this morning. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. You bought it. I own you, Julian, Minho said, his eyes snapping up to lock onto Julian's terrified face. I own your debt. I own your reputation. And right now you are standing in my cafe touching my property. Minho gestured to Vivian. Bad move, Minho whispered. Julian looked at Vivian. He looked at Minho. He realized the colossal mistake he had made. He hadn't just tracked down an ex-girlfriend. He had walked into the den of a lion and tried to steal the lion's favorite toy. I can pay, Julian squeaked. I can wire the money today. Money isn't the issue anymore, Minho said. He stood up straight, his full height looming over Julian. The issue is that you upset her, and I don't like it when she is upset. It ruins the coffee. Minho pointed a finger at a table in the corner. It was a command. Sit, Minho ordered. We are going to have a chat, and if you try to run, well, my security team outside hasn't had any exercise this week. Julian looked at the door. The two men in suits cracked their knuckles. Defeated, Julian lowered his head. He walked over to the table and sat down, looking small and broken. Minho turned to Vivian. Her eyes were wide, filled with shock and awe. She was clutching her wrist where Julian had grabbed her. Minho reached out and gently took her hand. He inspected the red marks forming on her skin. His touch was feather-light. Are you all right? He asked softly. Vivian nodded, unable to speak. Good, Minho said. Make me that Americano now. I have business to conduct. He turned and walked toward the table where Julian was waiting, radiating an aura of absolute power. Vivian watched him go, realizing that her life had just changed irrevocably. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was with the king. The cafe was quiet. The other customers, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, had mostly cleared out. The few who remained pretended to be engrossed in their laptops, but their headphones were turned off. They were listening. Minho sat opposite Julian at table 4. He sat comfortably, one leg crossed over the other, his posture relaxed. Julian, on the other hand, was sweating profusely. He kept dabbing his forehead with a napkin, his eyes darting to the security guards at the door. Vivian watched from behind the espresso machine. She had made the Americano, but she hadn't brought it over yet. She was frozen, witnessing the dismantling of her nightmare. So, Minho began, his voice low and conversational. Let's discuss your portfolio, Julian. Look, I can get you the money, Julian said quickly, his voice high and thin. I can liquidate some assets. I have a trust fund. Just give me a week. Minho shook his head slowly, as if disappointed in a child who couldn't grasp a simple math problem. You aren't listening. I told you I don't want your money. Money is easy to get. Respect, that is harder currency. Minho leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. You threatened a woman under my protection. That is a direct insult to me, and insults in my world are expensive. I didn't know, Julian pleaded. I swear. Ignorance is not a defense, Minho said coldly. He pulled out his phone. He didn't unlock it, he just set it on the table, screen facing Julian. What is this? Julian asked. Minho tapped the screen. A video began to play. It was grainy, black and white footage from a security camera inside an office. It showed Julian handing a briefcase to a man in a government uniform. Julian's face went from pale to ghostly white. He stopped breathing. That's not what it looks like, Julian whispered. It looks like you bribing a federal regulator to approve your last IPO, Minho said casually. Insider trading, bribery, federal crimes. That's 15 years in prison, Julian, minimum security if you're lucky, but with your attitude, you won't do well in prison. Julian looked at Minho with pure horror. Where did you get that? I know everything that happens in this city, Minho said. I have files on everyone, just in case. Minho picked up the phone and pocketed it. Now, here are your options. Option A, you stay in San Francisco. You try to bother Vivian again. I send this video to the SEC and the FBI within the hour. Your life is over. You go to jail. Your family disowns you. Minho paused, letting the threat hang in the air like smoke. Option B, Minho continued. You leave. Today, you get on a plane to, let's say, London, or maybe somewhere further. Singapore is nice this time of year. You never come back to California. You never contact Vivian. You forget she exists. Julian swallowed hard. He looked at Vivian behind the counter. He looked at Minho's cold, unforgiving eyes. He realized he had been playing checkers while Minho was playing 4D chess. If I leave, Julian whispered, the debt is gone. The debt is forgiven, Minho said. Consider it a severance package. Julian stood up. His legs were shaking. He looked at Vivian one last time. There was no love in his eyes, only fear and resentment, but he said nothing. He turned to Minho and nodded once. I'm leaving, Julian said. Smart choice, Minho said. He didn't stand up. He didn't offer a handshake. My men will escort you to the airport to ensure you don't get lost on the way. Julian flinched as the two security guards approached him. They flanked him, taking his arms not gently. As Julian was marched out of the café, stripped of his dignity and his power, Vivian let out a long, shuddering breath. The monster wasn't under the bed anymore. The monster had been evicted by the landlord. Minho stayed in his seat for a moment after the door closed. He adjusted his cufflinks. Then, he stood up and walked to the front door. He flipped the sign to closed and locked the deadbolt. The silence in the café was profound. Minho walked over to the counter. Vivian was still standing there, gripping the edge of the granite. She was trembling again, but this time it was the aftershock of relief. Vivian, Minho said softly. She looked up at him. Tears were streaming down her face. She tried to wipe them away with her apron, but they kept coming. He's gone, she whispered. Is he really gone? He is on his way to SFO, Minho confirmed. He will board a flight to London. If he tries to return, the authorities will be waiting for him. He is no longer a threat. Vivian let out a sob, a sound of pure, unadulterated release. Her legs gave out. She started to slide down toward the floor. Minho was around the counter in a heartbeat. He caught her before she hit the ground. He scooped her up effortlessly, his arms strong and secure around her waist. I've got you, he murmured. I've got you. He lifted her up and sat her on top of the counter. It was an intimate gesture, placing her at eye level with him. He didn't let go of her waist. You saved me, Vivian said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. You barely know me and you. I know enough, Minho interrupted. He reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. His skin was rougher than she expected, calloused from work or perhaps violence, but his touch was tender. Why? Vivian asked again. Why did you do it? Minho sighed. He looked down for a moment, then back into her eyes. The mask of the mafia boss slipped, revealing the man underneath. I have spent my life building walls, Minho said quietly. I build empires, I build fortresses, I keep people out. But 3 days ago, I walked in here and saw you. You were terrified, shaking, hiding behind an apron. But you were still standing. You were fighting a war all by yourself. He leaned in closer. I hated seeing you afraid. It made me angry. And when I realized I could stop it, I couldn't walk away. You belong here, Vivian. You belong in the light, not hiding in the shadows. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something electric. She looked at his lips, then up to his eyes. Who are you really, Minho? She asked. Rick says you're dangerous. Julian was terrified of you. Minho didn't shy away from the question. I am dangerous, he admitted. I run the syndicate. I control the ports, the real estate, the underground poker games. I am a man who does bad things to bad people. He paused, his gaze intensifying. But I will never be dangerous to you. To you, I am just the man who owns the coffee shop. Vivian reached out. Her hand hovered for a second, then she placed it on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it beating, steady, strong, alive. I'm not scared of you, she whispered, and she meant it. For the first time in 2 years, she felt completely, utterly safe. Minho looked at her hand on his chest. He covered it with his own. You have a loose strand of hair, he noted softly. He reached up and tucked a curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline. The air between them crackled with tension. You need a new job, Minho said, his voice husky. Vivian blinked. You're firing me. No, Minho said, a small, genuine smile playing on his lips. I'm promoting you. I don't need a barista anymore. I have plenty of people who can make coffee. I need someone I can trust. Someone who knows what it's like to survive. What are you offering? Vivian asked, breathless. Minho leaned in until their foreheads were almost touching. Everything, he whispered. I'm offering you everything. 2 weeks later. The wind whipped off the San Francisco Bay, cold and crisp, but inside the penthouse, it was warm. The apartment was located on the top floor of the Salesforce Tower, the highest point in the city. The view was breathtaking. From here, you could see the entire sprawl of San Francisco, the rolling fog, and the majestic red span of the Golden Gate Bridge. Vivian stood by the floor-to-ceiling window. She wasn't wearing a gray apron. She wasn't wearing practical sneakers. She was wearing a tailored cream blazer and matching trousers that fit her curves perfectly. Her hair was no longer in a tight, restrictive bun. It was loose, a halo of dark curls cascading down her shoulders, free and wild. She held a glass of champagne in her hand. Thinking, a voice came from behind her. Vivian turned. Minho walked into the room. He had ditched the tie, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked relaxed, happier. Just looking at the view, Vivian said. It looks different from up here. Everything looks different when you aren't looking over your shoulder, Minho said. He walked over to her and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder. Any news? Vivian asked. June called, Minho said. Julian was arrested at Heathrow Airport. Apparently, there was an anonymous tip about him carrying undeclared narcotics in his luggage. Vivian laughed softly. Did you put drugs in his bag? I can neither confirm nor deny that, Minho murmured against her neck, kissing the sensitive spot below her ear. Let's just say he won't be coming back to the States for a very, very long time. Vivian turned in his arms to face him. She looked up at the man who had changed her world. I signed the contract, she said. Which one? The management contract for the café chain, and the nonprofit for domestic abuse survivors you want to start funding. Minho nodded. Good, you'll run it better than anyone. You have the fire for it. I do, Vivian agreed. She felt powerful. She felt seen. Minho looked at her with an expression of pure adoration mixed with respect. You know, Vivian, I hired a barista because I needed coffee. I didn't expect to find a queen. Vivian smiled, a radiant, genuine smile that lit up the room. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was a kiss of gratitude, of passion, and of promise. And I took a job to hide, she whispered against his lips. I didn't expect to be found. Minho pulled her closer, the city lights twinkling behind them like a million stars applauding their victory. You're not hiding anymore, Vivian, Minho said firmly. Now we rule. Vivian looked out at the city one last time, then back at Minho. She wasn't the girl who dropped cups. She wasn't the girl who ran. She was Vivian, the partner of the king, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Thank you for watching to the end. Please remember to click the subscribe button and make sure you like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thank you.